Today I get practical and we talk about back squatting to be able to help you with your racing. Hey guys, welcome to MotoFit TV, episode number 19. Went for a little bit of a mountain bike ride on the weekend at Kalamunda. So did 22 Ks through the bush, which is a nice, decent loop through the hills. It was beautiful weather. But also when I'm out mountain biking, it allows me to do a lot of thinking about what we do with the show, what we're doing with our riders and racers, and some of the things that I can bring to you guys and girls to be able to help improve your performance out on the track, out on race day. And one of the things that did come to mind was that I do a lot of talking about stuff, and there's a lot of, I suppose, theoretical side of things. Haven't actually done any of the practical stuff with you guys in terms of actually showing you what you need to do and demonstrating some of the things that you can learn from, that you can improve with your actual training. I know I talk a lot about nutrition, a lot about multi-joint movements and lifting weights and getting strong, but I've never actually shown you. So today I want to step outside of the ordinary MotoFit TV show. And what I want to be able to do is walk you through the squat, or the back squat particularly. So the back squat is should be one of the staple movements of your training, okay? And if it's not, you need to make sure that it is, because it's one of the movements that actually resembles how we move on the bike as closely as we possibly can with training, okay? And allows us to be able to load that up as well, which is awesome. So I just want to talk you through, I know I talk a lot about working on mobility and working on flexibility, but everything's relative to your level of knowledge. You only implement the things with your training that you know of, that you've heard of, that you've seen, that you've read. So there may be things in there that you've missed. So I just want to give you a bit of an overview of back squatting, a few key areas to be able to look at, and how you can work on correcting that and making your movement more efficient, because I know I talk about movement efficiency a lot as well, which is important. So first thing with back squatting. So first of all, with all your training, you should be using a stick, okay? Especially for your warm up for correcting movement. Now, a lot of people, riders and racers, go into the gym, they focus on lifting heavy weights, sticking the weights on, doing a quick warm up and just getting into it. The stick is one of the most important things to be able to use. So this is just a broomstick. And I use this a heap in my training, okay? And a lot of people just want to lift the big stuff, they just want to lift the heavy stuff, they don't want to put the work in to actually improve their technique and improve their movement. And this is the best place to do it, because if you do something wrong with a stick, it's not really going to matter. If you do it wrong with 50, 100, 150 kilos on your back, then we're going to have dramas. So the first thing that I want to talk about in terms of back squatting and walking you guys through a little bit of a, tutorial. First thing I want to look at is our feet position. Okay, so we want to make sure that with your feet, they're at about hip width, okay? So looking at where they are at the moment. That's the first thing. So we want to be positioning each area of our body, which I'm going to walk through with you now. So first of all, feet need to be about hip width, okay? We want to be able to make sure that we're doing that because it helps us to resemble as close as we can. Number one, helps us to perform the movement correctly, but number two, also helps with our riding and racing in terms of carryover, okay? If we're using a more wider stance squat, we're going to find that it's using different muscle groups to what we use on the bike. So we want to work with about hip width, okay, roughly. So that's the first thing. Second thing that we want to do with our feet is we want to make sure that we have them relatively parallel, okay, or turned out a little bit. Most riders and racers will have some sort of movement dysfunction, previous injuries, tight hips, tight ankles, a whole heap of mobility issues, which stops them from performing movements correctly, which means it increases their likelihood, their chance of injury with their training, okay, which is something we definitely don't want. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that our feet are outside hip width, or about hip width, or just outside, and then we want to make sure that our feet are parallel, okay, or we can turn them out a little bit. What this allows you to do is maximize the activation of your glutes, but also help to keep your knees safe. Okay, a lot of riders and racers go and squat and they have mobility restrictions and they have their feet turned out severely, which means that when they squat, they have trouble keeping their knees out, okay? And what this means is because we have a whole heap of load on our back, these knees actually roll inwards. So if we're squatting and we have our feet turned out like this, okay, it's very easy for the knees to come in. So you can see from here that my knee's tracking towards the inside. It's much harder to get those knees out, which means you're going to have knee issues, knee problems, and if you've already had issues before, then this is definitely going to flare it up and make those knees an issue. So that's the first thing we want to work on is feet relatively parallel. We can turn them out a little bit. The next thing that we want to be able to focus on is creating what we call external rotation through the hip. Okay, so the hip, let me put my stick down. The hip is a ball and socket joint. There's two different ball and socket joints. We have the hips, and we have the shoulders. Okay, so pretty much we have our femur, okay, which runs up into our hip. Okay, so we have them working as a ball and socket. Okay, so our femur rotates in our hip and allows us to be able to squat, be able to move, ride the bike, do all the things that we need to do. Now, when we are squatting, we want to make sure that we've got that hip joint wound up super, super tight so that it's nice and stable when we're squatting. What this means is when the hip's actually stable and we create that external rotation, it keeps the knees out and driving outwards. It allows us to activate our glutes and keep them on and keep our knees safe. So we're keeping a whole heap of things safe. We're keeping a lot of tension in the system. The problem with most riders and racers is when they try and squat is what they'll do is they'll try and push, number one, they don't even worry about the knees or creating any type of external rotation, but they'll just try and push the knees out sideways, okay? What that does is it actually doesn't stabilize the hip. Think about this hip. Think about our femur going into our hip, okay? And imagine that there's there is connection points between the femur and between the hip, okay, holding them together. So what we want to be able to do is if we've got our joint as it is, there's a little bit of gap in there, okay, there's a little bit of free play in that hip. What we want to do is take all the slack out of the system and we want to be able to make sure that we are winding that right up. So what happens is when we wind that femur up, when we wind that hip right up, it pulls the femur right into the hip joint, which means that we can keep that joint nice and stable. Because we've got that joint nice and stable, it's now safe to be able to load. So we have the feet nice and straight. We want to twist out. So you can see that my knees are internally rotated at the moment. And then we can go to external rotation, which actually pushes the knees out sideways. Okay, which means when I squat, my knees are then out tracking nicely over my feet. So that's what we want to focus on there in terms of the hip. So the hip and the ankles help to control the movement of the knee. If the knees are going inwards, we're putting a whole heap of weight, a whole heap of stress through the actual joints rather than through the muscles. Okay, and we want to make sure that we're using the muscles. We want to make sure that we're not causing injury with your training further on down the track. So that's in terms of lower body. Another thing to be able to look at with your squatting, and I know this is fairly in depth now because we're just still talking about one movement, which is what we'll focus on for today, is we want to be able to look at our core and how we actually move. So now I've looked at positioning everything, that's all well and good, but then as soon as I move, we've got to know which order to be able to move things. So we want to make sure that when we have your bar on your back, okay, the first thing is that we have this rib cage pulled down, okay? A lot of riders and racers will squat and they'll pull the chest up like this, have this rib cage up, and they will have arching through the lower back, okay? Which means that they load up their lower back. So first thing, we want to pull this rib cage down nice and tight. When we're squatting, we want to make sure that we got our feet sorted, we've got everything sorted, ready to roll. We want to make sure that we push the hips back first. So the hips go back first, then we bend with the knees, okay? And then we can come back up and we reverse that order. So our hips go back, then we bend with the knees. And then we do the reverse on the way up, okay? You want to make sure the common faults with the squat are that people will bend the knees first, which means they load up their knees and they extend through the lower back. The other common fault is that maybe people will push the hips back first and then bend with the knees, but then when they come up, they try and pull up with their chest like this, and they load up their lower back. So every time you squat, you should never have a sore lower back from squatting. You should be able to train, you should be able to go in and do your session and not have to have a sore lower back or sore knees or sore ankles. If you do, there's movement dysfunction there, and that's the purpose of having someone being able to look at your training or being able to build up that education, like watching videos like this, is to be able to make sure that you can go and train, you don't have injuries, you're not getting hurt, so you can continue to train so you can actually go and ride and race on the weekend. So there's more to the squat, but they're the first few things I want you to be able to work on, okay? So we're looking at feet position as a recap, we're looking at feet position, We're looking at that external rotation, we're looking at keeping the rib cage down, and we're making sure that we're pushing the hips back first. So we're loading up the hamstrings and glutes rather than loading up the knees. So that's very important. So give me a little bit of feedback on today. I know it's a little bit different to what we normally do, a little bit more hands-on. Give me a little bit of feedback in the comments. Let me know what you think. See if you found it helpful. Is there something in here that's been able to help with your squat? And tell me the results. Tell me how you've gone as well. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Look forward to seeing you guys next week. Hope you get out for plenty of riding on the weekend. See ya.